Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to one of my little podcasts where I want to discuss some issues that I know I haven't been out there much with this, what we could call exopolitics, to use Michael Saller's, what he has generated. And I'm going to refer a little bit to a podcast or a series of podcasts he have made regarding Enki's little gift to humanity. And I must admit, I haven't listened to the first podcast with the woman that got the information, Elena Danan's new book, The Cedars from 2022, where she describes the meeting of leaders of one of the two main Anunnaki factions, Prince Ea, also known as Enki, who has just returned to our solar system. And she was told that he had brought the original Adamic DNA blueprint that could be used to remove harmful genetics alterations inflicted upon unwary humanity by the opposing Enlil faction of the Anunnaki, which has left its minions, that is the deep state, behind a millennia ago to control the Earth population. And I put the link below this podcast so you can listen to what Michael Saller has to say. And you could go in and listen to the original interview with Elena. And I tried to listen to it, but unfortunately, I almost get the code systems that are behind there are in conflict with my code system. So I can't listen to it without actually getting, feeling really, really sick. And it physically hurts me to listen to it. So therefore, unfortunately, I can't listen and listening in. But I do want to put in a little bit of things here, because one of those of you who are doing my courses on the whole academy, you know that I am working for the progression work, where we learn to upgrade who and whatever we are through the means of our own energy and clearing work, removing alien technology and the implants and everything that's been inserted, and clearing our original template from all of the insertions of the regressed races that have been here. And there is absolutely no doubt that the Anunnaki and the Elohim and the Baals and these groups, which are different groups, have played a huge role in modifying the human DNA and what we have become in the original version of the true human, as I call the original progressive humans that came to this solar system to be part of a project of undoing the effects of what I call the timeline event that damaged that group of the D13 collective that we now know as the humanoids. And the Anunnaki are part of that group, even though we could say they're one of the top figures in the D13 collective was the group from Vega, the D11. And there, technically, when we talk about Anu, there's the head of the Anunnaki and his genetic experimentation on our planet. And what he did here, I talk about that in the perception logs, led to two versions of himself where he recreated holographically he created his own trinity. Anu created his own trinity with Enlil and Enki. Enlil, in my perception, is avian human, whereas Enki is reptoid human. So to take care of these two things. And in my perception, Enki is not the one that loved humanity. On the contrary, we actually meet that version of him in the rewriting in the Hebrew Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, and the Old Testament, as we call it, as Satan that rumored the earth and tried to wrest it away from the Godhead or the Elohim. And the Elohim are something else. We don't really know if they are the Anunnaki, because the Elohim is the Hebrew version of the gods that created the angels. And if the angels were under the what can we call it, under the leadership of Enlil, who led the avian humans, which are the angels, and also the group that divided into becoming the falling angelics. then it's very difficult to figure out, okay, what's actually going on here. And we will play with the idea that Anu divided himself into two aspects, of one having his original Vega human avian configuration, and the other one having his original vegan human riptide configuration, because he wanted to work with what we could say both the D10 collective that are the riptide collective, and he also wanted to work with the lineages that were spawned out of Vega and into the avian lineages, which at the time were part of that upper sector that we call the Lyran system up there with Vega. Vega and Lyra are two different systems, even though that science tells us they are the same constellation. They are absolutely not. Lyra itself is D12, and then you have Vega that is D11, and then you have what we say D10 are the Draco system, and then you had the D9, which are typically, we are told that D9 is actually the Andromedan system, and there's a little bit of confusion there, because where does the avians come in? Where did they spawn from? And there is the system up in that sector that's called the Swan. So that's part of it. It's rarely included into our galactic history when we look at that section. And again, when many people talk about these things, they are referring to material that's been given from others, material that's been given from encounters such as, what's her name again? Sorry, about Elena and her encounters with someone from that Galactic Federation, whatever, called Thor Han. And for me, that name in itself, I'm just, I'm a very suspicious person. I'm not saying these people are not right. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm not in any ways or forms claiming that I know better, because we are all trying to figure out what's going on. But I have my own memories and my own suspicions and my own version of the galactic history as I recall it, as I remember it, after my enormously difficult activation process, which I have undergone over the last 12 years, if not my entire lifetime. And the reason why I came into this system in 1959 and why I ended up in this physical form, which is not mine, I am a walk-in, but I'm not put here by my own free will, and what happened when I entered, and why I came here from the Andromedan system, and all of these things that I recall as being my true memories, having weeded out the enormous amount of inserted and false memories that are also part of the regress genetics that are in a physical form, including that I had to work my way through this physical form and everything that this, the one that used to inhabit this physical form, I got inserted into it when she was around 4 years old, where she decided to leave, and I then got this physical form. And then my entire work, and I'm now in my 50s, to get to the point where I can use this body as much as possible to do my work, although that I am technically not supposed to be here. So my angle on things are very different, and why I came back and why I'm here and what I'm here to do and what I came to do in 1959 as part of the cleanup processes, because of the completion cycle and because of what's happening in our system. So I'm not in any way or form saying anyone is right or anyone is wrong, but I want to open up, as those of you who do the whole academy courses, I'm trying to create a discussion here. We need to look into this critically and try to navigate through all of this amount of information that is being given to us from these different groups of humanoids that are here, that are present here, that were supposed to be part of a healing project to restore their original genetic composition. And then the original two humans that came and participated in that from the D14 collective of the progressive worlds, of which I originate, although that you could say, well, Anu, or the Vega version of him, also originated from the Lyran groups that were, or the original true humans, but he inserted a lot of humanoid DNA so he could work with the humanoids to restore their genetics, because they began the regression after the timeline event, and the original humans of the D10 collective regressed into becoming the reptoids. So see, I have a different perspective of things. So it all comes down to what I wanted to discuss here is the clash of information that I respond to. I'm not saying this is right or wrong or whatever. I haven't spoken to Enki himself. Enki and I are not best friends. Let me put it that way. I'm not best friends with Endil either. So, not that it's kind of go to best buddies, right? No, and I'm not claiming in any way or form that I actually have some personal relationship with either one of them, but I have faint memories of them, as encounters in different, council meetings. The whole Anu project was not something I could back up or say thumbs up with. Inanna, that took over her father's project and what she did to it when she collaborated with the Orions and all the things that are going on there. So what we're dealing with here is not just the issue between Endil and Enki, because technically they are the same forefather, right? The same progenitor. They carry the same type of DNA, but they have variations. One goes reptoid and one goes avian, to collaborate with two main lineages that were in control of our sector at that time, and that were trying to recreate themselves using what we could say the holographic network and the racial grids that were a part of Earth as it had been reassembled after the timeline event. And this is again complex holographic dynamics. So it's not an easy peasy thing to say that Earth was as it was and matter existed, because it didn't before the timeline event. Matter as we know of it didn't exist, as I talk about in the Source of Humanity, even though it's a little bit an older version of this information. It's still the idea or the architecture behind it is still valid. The terminology, the way I'm explaining it, has of course developed into more nuanced perspective as I have learned more than I knew in 2014. But the architecture still stands, and there were these different groups here, and it were the original Pillar project that I advocate for were originally focused on the restoring, not to begin with because it had another purpose before the timeline event, but because of the timeline event of the infusion of third cycle energies into a fifth cycle workstation in the Sirian system, and that imploded and it all went south and affected the entire universal structure and reassembled it, blasted into pieces, reassembled it, and then it all got infused with third cycle energies, led to that regression of the original genetics of this universal cycle compared to the ones that were in the previous universal cycles, because that had then been invited in. And it all came down to an agreement the councils made with, let's call him Anu, to be at his version in the Sirian system, where he experimented with that because he wanted to create spaces within spaces so that the ones that did not make it in the previous universal cycle, they would get an artificial construction from where they could develop and continue their processes and upgrade. And you know that from the Source of Humanity, where we talk about, we had the D13 collective, and I talk about that in the whole philosophy book as well. The D13 collective that were of the, what we call the previous universal cycle, that group that was still working with spatial energies and technology. And then you had the D14 collective of this universal cycle. And we had already done everything that the D13 collective was doing. So we were moving on to the next step, where we're talking about developing consciousness and energy into life force, whereas the D13 collective was still on the path of transforming energy so that consciousness could be developed to a higher potential. So they were still using spatial energies and technologies to upgrade their systems, whereas the current universal cycle were on the next step. So this is kind of the two main lineages that we have. And we were then together and unfold everything. So we would become the next set of the D15 collective, which would then be the gathering rounds that would move into a new universal cycle, which we are preparing for. This is the completion cycle. So we are having the whole D13 collective that then began in all of its regressive ways because of the Syrian workstation implosion, the timeline event that then set these humanoids even further back because they then were imbued with what we call previous universal cycle or third cycle energy components, which then pushed them backwards in time, including creating this solar system as we have it now. And that where it happened in what we understand the fifth dimension, and then it imploded all the way down, and then it reassembled, and this is what came out of it. And then we had to start from scratch and figure out how to solve the issues of the now not only kind of the D13 collective was already behind, which I talk about in the Souls of Humanity. Now they were even further behind, and on top of that one, their genetics were beginning to fall apart and regress. So that's the context of my understanding. And when Alex Collier and Michael Zoller talks about that, they have different understandings of things. And I'm not going to say that that is true or untrue or whatever, because we really don't know, do we? We only know what we know and what we have heard of, or what we have been in contact with, or what we remember. And memories can be deceiving, so can information, and especially when we talk about members of the D13 collective, because in my understanding, the D13 collective already had a genetic flaw that gave them this ill-mindedness, that gave them this tendency to twist things a little bit and not really work for the unity of all and for the wholeness and the highest good of the many, but had that original flaw of really being prone to go to service to self. So, and when we look at Enlil and Enki, they are both, none of them are good guys. They're both bad guys. So we're here dealing with two bad guys that used to be part of a project of recreating a specific the whole idea with Arno's project was to splice the progressive D14 collective, or the Vega D11 version of the human genome, which kind of gives the Niburian outlook. That's kind of Vega, the vegans, let me call them that, the ones from Vega, they look like the Niburians. That was his masterpiece to create that type of human form. And then he spliced it with avian genetics to assist the avians to upgrade. And he spliced it with reptoid genetics to assist the reptoids to upgrade. And when I look at that depiction of quote unquote Enki that Elena has made for us, for me, that's an Orion. That's as Orion as it gets. So that's not the Enki I remember. So I don't know if that actually is Enki or someone that pretends to be Enki. And that's the problem when we're dealing with these kind of things, because none of us really remember, and they could have changed. Enki could, in his reptile human form, he could have lost the abilities of that one, and then he could have regressed, and now he's on a D8, and then he has become this, taken on an Orion vessel, which makes him look like that, and there are Syrian genetics in him as well, so it's an Orion Syrian. So it could be a version of Enki, but it could also be an imposter. That's the first thing I want to kick in here. So, and again, this is not an entity that I have encountered myself. I have not talked with this entity. That is androgen. Let me just put it that way. So everything about that depiction, everything about that picture that she has made does not ring a bell for me that that's Enki. On the contrary, that is some Orion with Syrian genetics, something else that is claiming to be Enki. So that's the first thing I want to put in here. So that's my opinion, and I could be wrong, and I will figure that one out, putting this out here. The second thing that makes it difficult for me is the 12-stranded Adamic DNA blueprint. You see, here I have issues, because the Adamic is, there are three atoms. There are the atom Cadmium, There are the Adama, and then there is this Adam that we know in the English language. And we know the Adam as that name from the Hebrew Bible. So that's under the Elohim. So how does that Orion Sirian have the blueprint for an Adamic blueprint under the Elohim, which we don't really know who are, because that's the Hebrew language. We don't really know if they are the same as the Anunnaki. So see, there I'm beginning to have issues. Secondly, most of the time when we talk about the Adamic, you see, if we go with the Hebrew Bible, then the Adama with an H at the end were the first male that were created by Yahweh Elohim. So we have the original Elohim in the first book of Genesis that created male and female in their own image. So these are what we could call, perhaps we could say, okay, if we go with the studied my bachelor degree of University of Copenhagen in theology. So if we go with the scholars, they are saying, well, the idea is technically that we had the Jews that were taken during the time of Babylon, they were taken in prison, they were taken to Babylon, and there they got infused with what we call the Baal Mardukian ideas. And here's important to understand that Marduk and the Baals are connected together. And the religion at that time were centered around the temple and the priesthoods. And the scholars are then saying, well, the Jews, before they came there, were nomadic people. Yes, they had their little tribal kings, but they were not this grand, there are discussions there. The Jews want to prove that they actually had the big cities and they had already built the temple, and all of this story that they have been making with the Hebrew Bible to create a story which, if you are from Copenhagen, the Copenhagen line of scholars will say, well, that's probably a made-up history to prove that they had the rights for the land, when they in fact were nomads that were coming from other areas, and they were already the Canaanites that were already there, and they had the god that's called Yahweh and his Asherah, or his female, as this typical thunder god with his consort Asherah. And then they went to these nomadic people, were then taken enslaved and taken to Babylon, similarly as there were also slaves from what we call Egypt. So we have, when we talk about Exodus and Moshe and that whole lineage and Aaron, that's the slaves that went to Egypt, and that's another group. And then you have the group that went to Babylon, and they took some of the ideas of the Baal religion and took it back with them. And Baal, remember, Marduk came later on. You have to know the chronology of the different Sumerian gods. So you have the original Anunnaki, and that came from the heavens. And then you had the shift of the god collective, and they kind of went into what we call a summarizing effect, where we then got the one god that is Marduk, and he were the city god, and he was the one that had the temple cult as we understand of it. And some of these Jews transported that to and rewrote that into their version of history, which is where we kind of say, well, if you do with the Elohim understanding, then well, that's the priestly lineages. Whereas you go with Yahweh lineages, then they are the ones that were of the original Canaanites, or the nomadic people that had that as their prime god, and they try to create that Yahweh in the same position as Marduk, as the only god, the Adonai, the Lord. Baal means the Lord, Baal, or Baal with an A. So again, we are having this conflict in the ideas. Well, if you have the idea of who is the Lord, is it Marduk in his version of Yahweh, or is it the Elohim that are actually the pantheon of gods that were creating males and females in their own image? And if you go with the rabbinic literature, they are saying that that's when they were in their light form, and then we had a later version where you have the skin form, but this is again just two different stories, so we can't really put them together. We're having different storylines, we're having different aspects of the same creational story, because if you go with the idea that you had this this light being in the first book of Genesis, and then, or the first creational story, and then you have the second one where Yahweh Elohim is creating Adama of the soil and blowing ruach or spirit into his nostrils from where he came to life. Then it's just kind of, that doesn't add up. That kind of clashes with the first creational story. So this is the problem with the Hebrew Bible, is that you technically have different stories. And that's why scholars come up with, well, that's because there's different factions. And then they have put it together like a patchwork and created the Hebrew Bible and said, this is the canonical text, or if they had the canonical, but this is the book as it is. And these are the stories that we must rely on as the Jewish people. And they are dealing with this whole kind of different aspects of it. I don't know how Jews are reconciling themselves with these difficulties in the text material that doesn't add up, and the what's missing there and what's put in there, and how these two creational stories clashes with each other. And that's probably why the different rabbis have been discussing it and saying, is it because it shows a different point of the story, or does it show a different version of the Godhead, or has the Lord different versions of himself, the one that is ruling the heavens and the one that's ruling earth? And then you begin to have the division of the Godhead, and suddenly you have this opposing faction or a factor that comes in as Satan, the adversary, coming in and suddenly challenging the Godhead on his almightiness. So there is this whole, where does these figures come from? These come out of nowhere. There's a lot of gaps when you read the Hebrew Bible in its original language, and it doesn't add up. And that's where we're seeing the same thing when we do with the Gospels. We are also having different stories that kind of clashes with each other, and there is always this, the scribes are always trying to put it together as saying, oh yeah, this adds up and this is the truth and what have you. But the problem is, what I wanted to go with this one is that when we do begin to talk about these ETs that are here and their use of our language to prove something, it always rises up an enormous amount of suspicion in me, because are they just using our joint history as we know of it in the collective field of consciousness on the human programs of religion and what have you, so that they can easily get us on board? Because this is what it feels for me. When you say 12-stranded Adamic DNA blueprint, first and foremost, Adam was in all ways and forms, there is a lot of thoughts going on here. First of all, if we're saying, well, if it fits with the story of Adam created by the Baal version of the Elohim, the Yahweh, the one, the Lord, for the heaven, not the heavenly version, but the ones that ruled over earth, which then came into battle with Satan, then for me, that's kind of where you have Enki and Enki story in a different variation, right? It just feels like that for me. And if we're saying, well, if we are saying the angelic humans are the first creation, so to speak, and the rhapsod humans are the second creation, then that doesn't add up. They are created to do two different purposes. So therefore, when we're talking about, did Enki at all have any jurisdiction on this planet? Absolutely not. That was part of what we call the angelic races that were taking part of that as part of the Anunnaki, as the super soldiers, the first group of super soldiers that were created as guardians on this planet for something entirely else. The Enki version was supposed to be, as I recall it, a diplomatic liaison between the Anu project and the Anunnaki and the reptilians. So for me also, when I look at that one, I'm kind of getting a little bit suspicious. Is that Thoth in a newer version? I know Thoth is a lot of avian stuff going on, but there has his shifted body. And then you see, I'm asking all the difficult questions here that makes me very suspicious. Plus, Adama is if we are going with the literature that we have, even though you say, well, that's the firstborn in the Garden of Eden, well, then the 12-stranded Adamic DNA blueprint is then the male. Where's the female in this picture? Does this mean, and it's interesting, we have two males discussing this, and we do have a female that is giving that information, but I have my own theories of why that is, but we'll just leave it there because I'm not going to tell how I see that one, because I wouldn't like anybody begin to read my energy field and tell me who and what I am. I would prefer to say that myself, so I'm not going to do that. But we can always have our ideas of why that is, or why people are chosen to be the spokespeople for these different groups and why they're doing it. I'm not saying it's because they are easy to persuade. I'm saying it's because there isn't a genetic affinity, as in I have memories of these different groups because I have genetic affinity as well. So you're kind of seeing this, we can only see and perceive what we have energetic and genetic affinity with. We can't look beyond our own genetic composition. So what we are made of allows us to perceive and exist and be and understand and interfere with or be aligned with the different groups in our universal sector. So that's what I'm saying. So nothing good or bad here, just pointing out that we have different abilities due to our different genetic compositions, and therefore we view history from different angles, and thereby we can't say this is the right or wrong angle because we're looking at things from different perspectives and different genetic compositions and different dimensional features and different scientific understandings of reality. And that makes it very difficult to go into the same room and try and figure out what we're actually dealing with. As you know, the old I think it's a Hindu saying where you have 6 scribes that go into, or 6 sages that goes into a dark room, and there's an elephant in the middle of the room, but the light is off so they can't see it, and they're positioned each side of the elephant, and one's get the trunk and one's get the leg and one gets the tail and one got one of the teeth and so forth, and they all interpret it in different ways because they can't see the entirety of it because the light is off. And that's what we're dealing with here. Just let us put that one in. So the first thing is that if this being that is clearly humanoids are not in favor of females. So for me, we are having some kind of gender bias here as well. It is when we are saying the Adamic, that's not human. That's Adam. That's the male. Okay. It's not Eve. It would, the 12-stranded Adam and Eve DNA, then we would have the females in. So this Syrian Orion, whatever he is not here to give the blueprint for an activation of females, because they really like females to continue to be the breeders, because that has a purpose of the hybrid project. So they're not going to interfere with that one. That's my understanding. So we're here talking about activation of the male DNA. And for those of you who listen to my classes and those of you who have listened to some of the information I've given from time to time, I have some kind of news that people can subscribe to. I've talked about one of the biggest issues on our planet is the male DNA. Female DNA, yes, definitely, there are issues there as well. But because we have the mitochondria, we have the maternal lineage in our mitochondria, we are still carrying some of the original genetic structures, which allows the different groups to utilize the female ovaries and eggs and womb for certain purposes that aligns with creation of hybrid children. So therefore, females we're already in the 4th cycle, whereas males are stuck in the 3rd cycle. That's the problem with the male genome. And that needs to be upgraded. So what he's here proposing is not an upgrading for females, because that would interfere with too many of the different groups that are here actively trying to create a new lineage, hybrid lineage, from where they can continue their different types of regressed LPF2 or density 2 genetics of the humanoid lineages, creating a new type of human that will be seated on New Earth or somewhere else. So we're here talking about the males that have had a huge infusion and a blow from as the last 5 years since 2017, where the dark level of the galactic core got activated. due to crash of two other black holes that got fused and that rippled out throughout the universal structure, hit our galactic core, rippled into the core of the sun. There was already already in the process of shedding off its upper shields and are now gone into its vibrational fields, and then it rippled in and created that dark ring around our sun, technically altering the core of our sun, so it emits more dark light than actually density 2 vibrational light, which is an issue on the different levels of the human genome, which we will encounter later on, and then into the core of our planet, and that opened up for all the gate systems that allowed a lot of third cycle energies and entities and technologies and AI cubes and what have you to flood in, and with that one opening up the gates for the dark ones to come in and really begin to chew their way throughout different forms of Sirian genetics. So what I think this Sirian Orion is, because I don't buy that that's Enki, or it could be a recreation of Enki or a version of Enki or what have you. I think it has more to do with an attempt to try and recreate the Orion Sirian blueprint in males so that there would be, for me, it feels like, it definitely feels like a Trojan horse for me. I wouldn't trust that guy, at any point in time. And I do think that if, you see, when I hear Collier and Michael Sala talk about this, that it has been taken up to the councils and they're discussing whether or not it is a genuine offer or if he actually has the blueprint. You see, this is where it clashes for me. Which council, if they can't, you see, when you go into a council meeting, you have all sorts of enormously advanced technology. Whenever you enter into these holographic meetups, you're always scanned. You go into different types of holographic bubbles. You're never really in touch with each other because you don't need to be telepathic, but you are in these bubbles, so we don't affect each other energetically or holographically with the different configurations that we have, because in the true dimensions, in the holographic worlds, everything's interconnected, everything is interactive, and everything can interfere with each other. And we know exactly who we're dealing with, what they are and what they're made of and what they're capable of and what their agenda is, even though that we have had issues, for instance, in the Sirian councils because they are only 5th dimensional and therefore they can't read what's going on in the 8th dimension. So if we're here having a Sirian Orion, that means a 5th dimensional and an 8th dimensional entity, he has an agenda on the 8th dimension connected to the Orion system, which are the dark conglomerate. And he has the Sirian genetics of the 5th dimension that aligns with the Sirian councils. And if the Galactic Federation is only on the 5th dimension, which would kind of fit with the different groups we have seen from the Galactic Confederation, and we'll talk about Earth alliances, are we talking about alliances of the different terrestrial systems that came after the timeline event or prior to the timeline event? Are the Andromedas included in the Earth Alliance? I don't know what the Earth Alliances are. I'm just kind of guessing here, right? But I'm asking questions. So if that's the case, well, then he can come in and present his Sirian version, and they will only see that's why the 12-stranded DNA blueprint, that's a Sirian B feature. That's their lingo. That's the Kalontics. That's the Christics. That's that lingo. That's their terminology. I've never heard it of within the Anunnaki anything that is 12-stranded Adamic. You see, for me, it's just kind of, it just, in my head, when 12-stranded Adamic is like, it's a clash of different thought forms. So that's just where it takes the Sirian 12-stranded ideas of the Melchizedek lineages of the Sirian priesthood, right? So that's that one. Then you have Adam that are part of the Elohim or the Hebrew Bible under Yahweh that were seated or supposedly seated in the heavenly cities or whatever that was, and that was the first vessel that technically were part of the Garden of Eden. And that means not here. So again, so that's can even humans on our planet carry the 12th strand when our entire planet, our entire solar system is barely ready to go into the 4th? Another clash. So see, I'm having difficulties here because there is no way in anything I know that adds up, other than for me being a typical attempt from one of the darker legions outside our system, trying to get access by using humans that are unaware of the enormous high level of manipulation these races are utilizing. It is so crazy, the amount of manipulation. And they are always using terminology that we know of, but not really know the details of, such as, if I'm correct, that the Adamic DNA blueprint does not have 12 strand. I don't know what the canonics say about that one. They could be, might not, I don't know. I haven't read it to all details. I haven't done all the classes of the canonics. I just recall some of it from the stellar activation cycle. And I started it, but it was not for me. I got a lot of energetic push outs and pushbacks, and I literally was told, that's not for you, you're not welcome in these types of teachings. So therefore I just listened to what I've heard out on YouTube, as well as read my way through Ashana Dean's books. But then if you ask me, do I remember anything there? No, not at all. If you look at my books, I am more talking about the Syrian A's, and in the context, the Syrian B's are the ones that are on top of that one, and they are really harsh on the Syrian A's. And the reason why, when I read the context, the reason why I didn't go all the way through and through, there's a lot of there which I could recognize, there's a lot of there which I know to be true, but then there were also these crashes and clashes of information that where my mind just say, no, that's not how I remember it. No, that's not how I remember it. And when my mind does that, then I can't breathe it in. I can't just go in and resonate with it. It's like my mind erases the information when it doesn't add up to what I know, what is in alignment with my configuration and alignment with my original construction of who and what I am and what I'm here to do. Then it's simply weeds off that information, saying, no, that's not for you. This is what you can take from it. And this is not for you, because the code system is not in alignment with your genetic blueprint. Because information is codes, and codes align with our DNA. So that's also why I have issues with this one. So for those of you who are really, really deep into the colontics, you might be able to say, well, there is this the 12-stranded Adamic DNA, and it does go for the female as well. But then why not just say the 12-stranded human DNA? Because as far as I recall that, I think that's what the colontics are saying, 12-stranded human DNA. Then it makes sense, because then we have the harmonic universe, man, or original human, or what have you. I can't remember what they're saying. Then that would add up. My problem here is the Adamic. That's where it's. That's my problem. Sorry about that one. That's and I can't, other than what I've said here, I haven't got the full scope of it. But if you ask me, my gut feeling, that is, as I said, another attempt to get access. That is taking the information that we already have gotten without truly knowing what it is, because we have gotten so much information from so many different factions, and we're trying to piece all of that information together. And it's very confusing, because it's like the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels. Each faction tell their own story, even though they're trying to make it into some kind of unity we understand. Also, when we talk about the good work that Alice Collier have done, what I recall from his earlier, for instance, on the ranch, and some of the things he have said, there's a lot of there which I can remember that one too. And then there is other stuff where I can say, Yeah, that doesn't really go with what I remember. But what I do remember, the Andromedans said to him that they have looked into our Earth history and they have concluded this. So there are outsiders reading our Earth history and giving it to him so he can recall that he used to be one of the warriors in one of the Andromedan wars here, or whatever, or the Orions he was fighting with, or whatever. I can't remember which faction he was battling with, but he got killed and ended up here because when you die in a system, you are reborn within that system. So that's kind of whatever. And I don't know if the Andromedans he's talking with now are the same as the Andromedans he talked with in the 80s and 90s. I'm not to judge on that one whatsoever, but for me, it's a very, very long time. And the level of work that he instigated, I know he has had his own tribulation in his personal life because of this and had his own dealings with it, as we all have. So I'm not saying good or bad or anything. I actually think that Alex has provided a lot of really good information. I'm just not agreeing with all the information he has got, including the understanding of how we came into physicality as these souls that then took on matter forms. I don't agree with the descent in that manner. That's not how I see it, because the timeline event created the matter forms. And yes, then we took on these matter forms, but it was not part of the God's plan or source plan or what have you. That was kind of someone fucked up. So we had to adjust. We had to learn to deal with this, to undo the effects of it, to free these genetics from the new solidified organic vessels that were created because of the timeline event and the infusion of the third cycle energies, all due to Assyrian experimentation. Not done by some greater purpose, but done by some really shitty experimentation with spatial energies that were not supposed to have been experimented with, but Anu got the allowances from the councils. So in all of this, what I'm saying here and what I put in here is, over the course of time I've been doing this, I have listened to so many people, and I've heard so many say, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to help humanity, this is this and this is that and whatever. And I also know that when we talk about the avian councils, or when the Niburians came back in whatever forms, and they say they would clear up their technologies. And as a matter of fact, they went in. Yes, they did clear up some of these technologies, but they were also harvesting while they were here. And one of the things I can say with these groups of humanoids, none of them can be trusted. None of them can be trusted. Even the Galactics that talk about how they shift sides and align with each other and do alliances, and then they work together, and then they unravel these, and then they fight each other, and the factional wars and factional disputes and factional politics. It's impossible. They are. Each group is playing by their own rules of engagement. Each group has their own politics. Each group has their own laws, and they're always fighting with each other, unless they have a common goal to colonize a system or take over a system or whatever. And in my personal experience, and in 20 years I've been doing this work and dealing with the different groups as I work my way through the different timelines where I had my memories and recalling this, it's always someone has an idea to solve the equation, the problem here, and then they work for it. And then they use a lot of technology, and then the technology they're using will get contaminated and infected because they are linking up to the existing technology that is behind our enclosure, which were one of the Anu projects that were created in the outer domain, in the outskirts close to the abyss, that were a later invention because of the contamination and the effects of the timeline event, where quite a lot of the humanoids were actually put in stasis and were put out here to heal and got inserted into new type of physical vessels, which are the blueprint of, if we are talking about any forms of Adama, then Adama, that blueprint is the original restoration blueprint that Anu created for the humanoids when they were so affected by the timeline event that they were no longer safe to have in their own systems. They were deported here, their original body was put in stasis, and then their template and architecture were downsized and put into that vessel that I think this Enki figure, or whatever his name is, he has a different name. I can see his name. I'm so sure it's not Enki. I'm so sure, but he's using that one because, nobody would talk his case if he actually told who he was and where he was from and what he's known for. That's just what I'm getting here. So, and I can't pronounce his name because it's a very long name. It's a long lines of syllables that actually tells who and what he is. And if I look at that clothes he's wearing, I would say he is a general in the Orion army. And that's just my thing on that one. So from where I'm standing, what I think this being wants to do is to activate secret coding that Anu had in some of his blueprints of super soldiers that were not the angelic races, but there was this group that was supposed to work as part of Guardians on our planet, because he needed, as he created this project, he also created a specific type of humans that were supposed to be in human form. There were this type of super soldiers. And I think that's the one he wants to activate. He doesn't want to activate and I said there were 3 different types of atoms, and I think that's the version of it. There's the Adam Cadman. There is kind of the perfected male. Nobody wants that because that's, I can't explain why, but nobody wants that because that's too dangerous. That's uncontrollable. That would give the full freedom for the male genome, and nobody's interested in that because males are useful for the humanoids for different reasons and purposes. So, and then there are the Adam Cadman, which are kind of what we could say, the one that's been often used as the template for the priestly lineages in the different groups that have been here, using whenever they need a priesthood, they create it from the Adam Cadman. And then there's the last one, there's the soldier. And that's the one I think he wants to activate. So what I'm here suggesting and what I'm getting is that what they're actually discussing here is not activation of the broad population, but a group within humanity, a group of males within the human population on different continents that will then come in and act as the new super soldier. And if that's the case, then I am pretty sure that some of the one in deep state and in some of the breakaway civilizations that are looking into the future and foreseeing some quite dark times coming around as more and more of the old gate systems will open up, they might see it in their interest to actually activate a portion of males to become this new line of Adamic blueprint super soldier version of what we could call the males. And that will activate different strands, but only up to, I'm getting the 8th dimension. Because if they go beyond that, then they will be above the Orion system, and then they will be able to align themselves with other groups from where they would have stronger power and the true understanding of power and the true understanding of actually how to navigate within this reality. So with that very long little talk about this one, that's kind of what I wanted to say. I kind of let it go the first time around a couple of months ago or a month ago. I don't have any time. It's just another day goes by, right? Another day takes another day. The time goes by. But here, I just been looking into it again. And if Michael Sala asked, Alex Collier if he thinks it's a good idea. And I will, as another part of this planet, and whoever is here waking up and beginning to have an interest in what we call galactic politics and the races that are here, I'm hereby clearly saying I do not think it's a good idea to rearrange and re-engineer the male genome of the lineages that goes with the soldier of the Adamic version that will allow for an Orion Sirian infused army on this planet under the Orion ruleship of this general of a name that I cannot pronounce, but I have it in my head, and what he wants to recreate here. It is also unheard of that one man has the blueprint for an entire species. That is something Anu did with his different groups, and that goes with the ill-mindedness, that goes with the superior line of thought, that goes with the progenitor, the overlord ideas, that he would then become the new ruler of this species that he wants to reactivate and ignite inside this reality. And my best guess is he has traded himself to this blueprint. It is not the original blueprint. It is almost for certain been tampered with. And if it goes with everything else that has been sold to us from these groups, it has a backdoor, it is a Trojan horse, and it will not lead to anything good. We should have learned already by the military projects and what happened there where the Orions used the Pleiadian genetics as a backdoor. Are they now trying to do the same with the male Syrian genetics and the lineages of the males because of the dark light and the dark light irradiation of the sun that now makes it possible for these Orion Syrian races to come back in if they can activate that blueprint in a specific segment of the male population? So my answer to that one is this is an act of war, and this is a clear no. I do not give consent, and I do not agree or give any allowances for that blueprint to be activated in the male genome. I do not think that that will assist and help humanity. Thank you.